That's really fascinating to me because now that you mention it that way, that makes complete sense because before I started my dog sitting, dog boarding, and daycare business, I had come to this massive awakening that I was very empathetic and that was a lot of my troubles with certain people in my life. And when I'd hang out with them, I would always, not feel good afterwards, right? And I think, I started learning more about empathy and or being empathetic and, all this stuff. So I started developing those tools to have those boundaries and knowing when to know, being more cognizant or aware of when I was having these lower feelings around people and making sure I protected myself in that way. However, I never put two and two together when I started my pet business. And at first I had all these anxious dogs coming in because, well, at first I didn't have a whole lot of anxious dogs, but right after I started in 2019, so 2020 was kind of quiet. At the end of 2020, it blew up, and now I had all these new puppies that were never allowed to socialize. And so here they were, extremely frightened of every single little thing in the world because they hadn't experienced anything yet. And when they'd come into my home and they're whining and they're barking or they wouldn't even have to be whining or barking. You could just sense how anxious they were. And I couldn't go out of a room or I couldn't be around them without it affecting me. And I was
You
definitely,
would almost be like, oh, you're feeling all this anxiety. You're taking it into yourself.
yeah, I was always
It's not
rushing. I was
what
always,
for anxiety. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it was so wild. And it took a little while, but I finally realized one day that I was feeling very anxious and that I was picking up on it from the dogs
Yeah.
or a dog. And
Yeah.
then I started recognizing how much it was affecting the entire pack of dogs,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's where, you know, and interestingly enough, like we said off camera before we started this, is we often attract and help those with the things that we need help with, right? And
Yeah.
I certainly needed help with being able to become more grounded and balanced and less of an anxious rush. I was always a rushing, busy person. And I just needed to, bring it down a notch. And I always attracted all the dogs that had anxiety. And and so I ended up specializing in how to help dogs be more confident and calm in social settings and in special or in socialization.
Well,
Uh,
that's great.
yeah. So
It was a calling for you, and you needed to go through that also for yourself. And I'm sure in terms of being the second you put the awareness on it, it's like that's when you start the healing of it, you know?
yeah.
Like, because obviously if you're not being consciously aware of it, you can't really deal with it. But yeah,
Yeah.
you were obviously, and it also makes sense that you were calling in these dogs yourself, but also that time period you would just be having, I'm sure everyone around the country in your line of work would have been dealing with these unsocialized anxious dogs because
Yeah.
the world was starting to come back, to quote unquote normal, and these dogs had no idea. They'd only been in the house. And
Right. That was their normal, the silence. Yeah.
yeah, that's right. And they always had their people around all the time too.
Yeah.
So it's a huge deal. And, that kind of brings us to like all of this energy stuff and how it affects our animals, right? Because,
Yes. Let's get into that.
yeah, I mean, there's so, animals are, like we said, pure and living. All of their intuition is just a part of who they are. There's no like, oh, I better, I'm getting this empathic thing. I better second guess that. And no, they don't do that. Like it is what it is. They're reading energy all the time. That's who they are. And animals in the wild, same thing. They're
Yeah.
communicating through energy. They communicate through telepathy, right? Thoughts.
Okay.
They're reading thoughts.
Okay. You
Um,
just you just solved a big mystery that I've been debating in my mind for I don't know, the last 6 months or so. So thank you for
Oh, well, we can talk about that because I'm happy to talk about that because, there's more and more awareness coming out there right now about telepathy because of this. There's a podcast called the Telepathy Tapes, right? And
Yeah,
that's getting
I
like
love
so
it.
much like, buzz.
Yes.
And it's so funny to me because like this is again, this stuff like I've always just kind of known. Like when people say like, so the Telepathy Tapes is about autism
Yes.
and families of like nonverbal autistic kids where the parents kind of know what the kids need or know what the kids are thinking or the caregivers and vice versa. The kids are like, parents are like, oh my God, the kids are like reading my thoughts. I'm like, well, what do you think? Of course they're reading your thoughts. They are using telepathy. And what is telepathy? Right? So that is like thought to thought. So what I like to say about that is it's kind of like higher self to higher self. Like if I were to talk to you, April, right now, instead of using my mouth and forming words, if I just kind of went up here in my consciousness and like sent you a thought to your higher self, and then you kind of hear it and translate it and send it back, that would be us doing telepathy.
Hey guys, thanks for listening. If you found that interesting, then you're going to want to watch the entire episode. So click right here for the next video and get a special grounding process that Alana guides us through that you can use on yourself and your fur clients.